the vaulted obsidian ceiling of the Grand Conclave of Xylos, a structure that had silently observed the rise and fall of 3 galactic epochs, seemed to press down upon the assembled delegates, its polished surface reflecting the sickly green luminescence of the central strategic projection. Dust motes, millennia old and undisturbed by the casual movement of lesser beings, drifted lazily in the stagnant air, disturbed only by the barely perceptible vibrations emanating from the massive energy dampeners holding the anomaly, the human vessel, at bay within the secure quarantine sector miles beneath the chamber floor. Silence reigned, heavy and brittle, a silence composed not of peace, but of profound, species-wide apprehension. Elder Praetor Cathar, his carapace shimmering with the deep indigo of extreme age and political authority, straightened his segmented posture, the faint clicking of his primary joints echoing unnervingly in the cavernous space. The holographic representation of the singular, impossibly small vessel, a thing of brutalist angles and matte, non-reflective surfaces, hovered mockingly before them, a grid of defiance against the refined elegance of the Zalosian hegemony's defenses. "We have analyzed the captured data fragments again, esteemed colleagues," Cathar intoned, his vocal cords resonating at a frequency barely tolerable to the surrounding species, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "The results remain insufficient. Their technology, while undeniably primitive in terms of energy channeling and spatial manipulation, exhibits a core methodology utterly alien to our understanding of applied physics. It is brute force layered upon rudimentary computation. Yet they breached the outer cordon without triggering any of our established threat protocols beyond the initial automated response." He paused, allowing the weight of the statement to settle, his multifaceted eyes swiveling slowly across the council. The serpentine delegates of the Carillion Ascendancy, the towering, crystalline forms of the Silith Hegemon, and the squat, biomechanically integrated representatives of the Signian Collective. They are here, uninvited, unannounced. And now contained, yet their very presence is a geopolitical earthquake. Ambassador Vilos of the Carillion Ascendancy hissed, the sound barely audible but sharp with patrician disdain. Its serpentine form coiled tighter against its plinth, the specialized translator rendering its venomous undertones into precisely calibrated Xylosian syntax. "Praetor, your hesitation insults the very foundation of the hegemony's security doctrine. Primitive, you say. Primitive beings do not bypass the phase-shifting lattices designed to repel incursions from fully realized sector powers. They do not survive the near-absolute zero vacuum of the quarantine field without massive energy expenditure, yet their vessel registers almost zero active shielding output. It is either an act of unprecedented, deliberate stealth, or something far more disturbing, an indifference to the established laws of engagement we hold sacred." Vilos flicked a sensor filament dismissively towards the human ship projection. "We should incinerate the containment sector immediately. The risk of contamination outweighs the value of studying such an insignificant speck." The Silith Hegemon, a structure of slow-moving, refractive quartz that communicated through precisely controlled light patterns perceived as deep, resonant bass notes, pulsed a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The translation unit hummed. "Incineration is premature. We seek knowledge even from the most minuscule anomaly. This species, the humans, has exhibited a behavioral profile that defies our predictive models. They do not seek resources. They do not broadcast territorial demands. Their vessel contains no readily identifiable weaponry capable of interstellar conflict as we define it. They simply arrived. A singular craft, operating outside all known navigational signatures. It is this very void of actionable intent that breeds suspicion." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. The humans had been intercepted 3 rotation cycles prior, not engaging, not retreating, but hovering silently just beyond the charted debris field of a long-forgotten supernova, a location deemed safe precisely because of its stellar nothingness. When the Hegemony Patrol cruisers approached, the human vessel had not activated defensive countermeasures, but rather had deployed a single, slow-moving probe, a beacon of baffling simplicity that broadcast nothing but highly compressed, repeating mathematical sequences that seemed deliberately designed to mimic background cosmic radiation, until the Xylosian decryption matrix forced the full signal lock. "Their intent is irrelevant," snapped Delegate Thrawn of the Signian Collective, its biomechanical arms whirring slightly as it adjusted its environmental interface. "What matters is capability, their initial BR." Odecast, when finally parsed, contained a single detailed schematic, a schematic for a localized atmospheric containment field designed for transfer, not defense. They were offering to exchange atmospheric processing data. They arrived offering environmental support to a potentially failing orbital station near the perimeter, a station we have already deemed expendable. Thrawn's synthesized voice was laced with incredulity. They treat galactic space like a shared infrastructure network, ignoring sovereign boundaries, offering aid to perceived derelicts. It suggests a profound cultural naivety, or a level of arrogance so extreme it circles back to delusion. Praetor Cathar closed his primary optical sensors briefly, absorbing the dissent and the fear. The Zalosian philosophy valued order, predictability, and the slow, methodical expansion of established consensus. Humanity, even this single, silent ship, represented chaos incarnate. We have dispatched the envoy team. They are currently in stasis chambers awaiting deployment. The parameters remain the same: caution, non-aggression, and absolute information acquisition. We must understand why they are here before we commit the entirety of the Ninth Fleet to an unknown variable. He looked towards the central viewport, which now displayed the live feed from the quarantine sector. The human ship remained inert, a dark pebble against the backdrop of captured energy fields. The risk calculation demands we treat them as an emergent, high-level threat until proven otherwise. Their ability to remain unseen by our macro-surveillance grids suggests an understanding of quantum entanglement manipulation, far beyond our own theoretical applications. The political paralysis continued for several long, agonizing hours, measured not in time but in the slow decay of political certainty. The hegemony, accustomed to dictating the flow of information and the boundaries of the known universe, found itself staring into an abyss of ignorance courtesy of a species whose primary orbital signature matched that of a small, pre-warp asteroid mining platform. The deeper they analyzed the data packets they had managed to siphon, the stranger the picture became. There were no weapon targeting systems recognizable by known kinetic, energy, or spatial distortion metrics. Instead, the core systems were dominated by vast, layered encryption protocols and data archives detailing ecological remediation projects, historical analyses of localized thermonuclear conflicts that seemed impossibly brutal and self-destructive, and an unsettlingly detailed catalog of philosophical texts concerning individual liberty and existential responsibility. Their cultural memory is saturated with self-inflicted collapse, observed the Silith hegemon, the quartz surface flickering with complex internal stress fractures. They appear to have survived multiple near-extinction events driven by their own internal conflicts. This suggests not technological weakness, but a persistent, almost biological drive toward self-correction under duress. They are defined by overcoming catastrophic failure. Or perhaps, countered Ambassador Vilos, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, they are defined by the capacity for such failure. A species that requires such constant, violent self-scrutiny to maintain equilibrium is inherently unstable on the galactic stage. Imagine such a volatile element interacting with the established stability of the core worlds. Cathar made his decision, the gravity of it settling like a mantle of lead. We permit first contact, but on our terms. Envoy Sigma will enter the containment field. They will be encased in full non-lethal quarantine suits, equipped only with primary translation matrices and recording devices. Their mission is purely observational and diplomatic preamble. No escalation, no overt displays of force. Let us see how these humans react to the structure of true galactic governance. The preparations were meticulous, stretching across another full rotation cycle. The envoy team, composed of 3 of the hegemony's most seasoned xenolinguists and cultural analysts, were prepped for a rapid deployment and immediate extraction. The anticipation within the Grand Conclave became almost unbearable. They were preparing to confront an unknown quantity, not with overwhelming force, as was custom, but with measured, almost fragile diplomacy. The political fallout, should they miscalculate, would shatter the fragile alliances holding the hegemony together, potentially inviting challenges from the outlying fringe empires who had long chafed under Zylosian authority. The fate of local stability rested on the calm response of a few thousand tons of unknown metallurgy currently being held hostage by the power of their collective will. Deep below the conclave, in the staging area adjacent to the containment field generators, the atmosphere was sterile, thick with ozone and the hum of immense power channeling into the dampening lattices. The human vessel, held perfectly static within a shimmering, green-tinged cage of captured energy, sat silently. It looked small, almost pathetically frail under the oppressive force exerted upon it. Envoy Sigma stood ready, their specialized environmental shells gleaming under the harsh utility lights. Then the unexpected occurred. Not a physical breach, not an energy spike, but a deliberate, controlled response from the human craft. A narrow aperture hissed open on the vessel's hull, a small, utilitarian hatch clearly designed for external access or maintenance. No weapon ports deployed. No defensive screens flared. From the opening, a single small object was ejected, not with force, but with the gentle precision of a carefully launched seed pod. It drifted slowly toward the containment field boundary, its trajectory perfectly predictable. On the conclave monitors, the observers leaned forward. The object was rectangular, featureless, radiating no discernible energy signature. It stopped exactly 1 meter from the energy cage, hovering, waiting. "It is a probe, Praetor," reported the chief tactical officer, his voice tight. "A passive sensor package, perhaps, no weaponization detected." Cathar watched the image, his ancient carapace prickling with an unfamiliar sensation, a cold, analytical dread that bypassed instinctual fear. "Allow the envoy team to approach the boundary. Let them observe the object. Do not touch it." As Envoy Sigma advanced cautiously, their heavy boots echoing on the metal deck, the human craft performed its second action. The small rectangular object pulsed once, a dim white light emanating from its center, and then began to broadcast. It was not a barrage of data, nor an attempt at encrypted communication. It was a single, perfectly rendered, high-definition holographic projection, hovering silently in the vacuum between the human ship and the approaching Zalosian team. The projection was of a single human being. It was not an imposing figure, nor one adorned with symbols of military might. It was a male, average in stature, wearing simple, dark fabric. His face, captured in flawless detail, was unadorned, displaying no obvious emotional valence beyond a profound, almost weary stillness. He did not shout, threaten, or gesture wildly. He simply existed within the projected space, meeting the collective gaze of the watching Zalosian observers through the intermediary sensors. Then the synthesized voice of the human filled the chamber, calm, measured, and utterly devoid of the aggressive cadences common to lesser-contacted species. It spoke flawless, classically structured Zalosian, derived, they realized with a sickening lurch, from the hegemony's oldest, most obscure historical archives. "To the governing body observing this transmission," the projection stated, the tone utterly neutral, possessing the cadence of a deeply practiced orator delivering factual evidence. "We are the representatives of the Terran mandate. We understand the constraints and the suspicion under which this quarantine has been established. We offer no threat. Our intentions are singular: to establish parity of information regarding the spatial anomalies now manifesting in the outer rim, anomalies which your own sensor arrays clearly indicate are accelerating in frequency and severity." The air in the Grand Conclave seemed to thin. Anomaly acceleration. They had been dealing with localized gravimetric distortions, dismissed as residual effects of the ancient stellar collapse. They had not, until this moment, perceived them as accelerating. Cathar, recovering first from the shock of the direct, rational address, activated his own command channel, his voice booming into the envoy comms, though the human projection seemed equally capable of hearing him. "Human entity, you project an understanding of our internal affairs that is not public knowledge. Explain your methodology for obtaining this intelligence." The human figure remained motionless, the projected image conveying an absolute, unwavering composure that felt, strangely, more intimidating than any display of raw power. "We do not rely on proprietary interpretations of observed phenomena, Praetor," the human replied smoothly. "We rely on direct observation and predictive modeling based on established physical constants. Your long-range telemetry feeds, when filtered through appropriate noise reduction algorithms and cross-referenced against known gravitational variances, reveal a consistent upward curve in localized decay rates along the R7 transit corridors. You treat these as local weather. We identify them as precursors to systemic failure. This is not espionage. It is basic applied physics applied to publicly available data streams." The Silith hegemon pulsed rapidly, a rapid, stuttering light show that signified extreme agitation. "They imply our long-range threat assessment prot. Akals are fundamentally flawed. They treat millennia of hegemonic observational science as basic applied physics. Ambassador Vilos recoiled, not physically, but through the sudden tension in his usually fluid musculature. This is an act of calculated intellectual aggression. They are challenging our perceived superiority before a formal introduction. Cathar silenced the Carillion with a sharp gesture. He focused intensely on the human projection. If your intent is indeed parity, then establish immediate communication channels outside of this restricted frequency. We will permit a single secure channel transfer. If your data merits the disruption you have caused, we will proceed. If it is a fabrication designed to sow discord, your vessel will be vaporized immediately upon disconnection. The human figure nodded once, a gesture of human acknowledgement that seemed profoundly ancient in its simplicity. Agreed. We anticipated this requirement for verification. We are transmitting the necessary authentication keys now. The data packet awaiting your reception is coded for immediate, high-priority decryption by your primary analytical nexus. It contains our full rationale, our projected threat timeline, and the specifications for the atmospheric containment system we were prepared to deploy near the derelict station, the system you have dismissed as irrelevant. There was a tense, elongated pause as the Zalosian security systems fought with the incoming, tiny trickle of data from the human craft. The hegemony's main processing cores, designed to handle the complex, layered encryption of rival empires, struggled against the sheer density of the human packet, which seemed to be structured on a different axiomatic basis entirely. When the first confirmed data streams began to stabilize on the main tactical display, the reaction in the conclave was not one of triumph, but of dawning, species-shaking horror. The data was not complex in its application, but terrifying in its scope. It detailed not just the acceleration of the spatial anomalies, but the nature of the distortions themselves. They were not random, they were signatures. Signatures consistent with the localized collapse of subspace stability caused by massive, controlled displacements of matter, displacements that could only be achieved through power levels far exceeding the theoretical maximums the hegemony ascribed to any known stable civilization. The Silith hegemon's light slowed, becoming a deep, ominous violet. The anomalies, they are not decay. They are the wake of something moving incredibly fast, something that warps reality by its mere transit. The energy signatures, they are orders of magnitude beyond the combined output of the entire hegemony star-forge cluster. The tactical display shifted, no longer showing the small human vessel, but a simulation generated by the incoming human data. It depicted a vast, encroaching presence, a wave of gravitational distortion moving across the galactic plane, consuming regions of space long considered impenetrable. What, Cathar breathed to sound a dry rasp, is the source of these distortions? The human projection remained calm, a steady anchor in the sudden storm of existential revelation. The source is the reason for our arrival, Praetor. We call them the architects. They are not biological, nor are they machines in the sense your species understands. They are a self-assembling, universal constant of physical degradation, a force that organizes entropy. They consume structured energy gradients. They are approaching the known limits of the Perseus arm. By our calculations, they will reach the borders of your charted space within 72 standard cycles if trajectory remains unperturbed. The political reality of the conclave shattered. For centuries, the hegemony had managed minor border skirmishes, navigated subtle diplomatic betrayals, and maintained a perceived mastery over their local domain. They had never contemplated a force that operated on the scale of universal physics, a threat that viewed structured civilization as mere fuel waiting to be processed. Ambassador Vilos abandoned all pretense of aristocratic superiority, his serpentine body snapping taut with pure adrenaline. This is madness, propaganda. If such a power existed, the major recognized sector alliances would have sounded the alarm centuries ago. They did, the human stated flatly. Your civilization, and several others we cataloged in this sector, possess historical records of the Great Silence, the period approximately 1,000 standard years ago when several high-energy civilizations abruptly ceased all known transmission. These civilizations were not destroyed by conflict or resource depletion, Praetor. They were assimilated by the architects. Their records were not destroyed. They were integrated into the architect's own process, rendered functionally inaccessible to external analysis. The weight of the human revelation was crushing. They had been so arrogant, so focused on internal politics and perceived external rivals that they had been functionally blind to the true scale of cosmic horror approaching their periphery. Humanity, underestimated as a primitive upstart, had crossed the gulf of space not in conquest, but in urgent, terrifying warning. Cathar focused on the human's gaze, seeking any flicker of deception, any sign of manipulation. He found only the chilling clarity of desperation wrapped in meticulous control. If this threat is accurate, human, why have you traveled in a single, unescorted vessel? Why not bring your full fleet, your full arsenal? The projection displayed a subtle, almost painful contraction around the eyes. The closest the image came to conveying effort or sorrow. Praetor, you misunderstand the nature of our presence and perhaps the nature of our species. We are not a monolithic empire capable of projecting overwhelming force across vast gulfs of space. We are survivors. Our civilization emerged from a near-total collapse, driven by the very conflict we mentioned, the struggle for ideological and material dominance. We learned through the absolute necessity of rebuilding from ashes, a concept you may find unfamiliar: efficiency. He paused, and the next words struck the conclave with the force of a physical blow. We do not possess the energy reserves, the raw material base, or the temporal window to mobilize a conventional fleet capable of engaging a force that weaponizes causality itself. We burned our old armies to ash in the process of learning not to rely on them. This vessel, the unyielding will, is not a warship designed for open conflict. It is a diplomatic platform carrying the only asset we possess capable of influencing the architects. Applied knowledge of their methodology, gleaned from the limited wreckage, we managed to recover from those civilizations they consumed long ago. The atmosphere in the Grand Conclave shifted from political tension to existential terror. The hegemony was built on the premise of overwhelming power projection. Humanity's message was clear: power, as they understood it, was useless against this threat. They needed something else. They needed understanding. You imply, Cathar said slowly, his voice regaining a measure of its customary authority through sheer force of will, that you are offering us the key to defeating an enemy whose sheer energetic footprint renders our entire military capacity irrelevant. Yet, you arrived alone, effectively surrendering yourselves to our quarantine protocols. We arrived alone because rapid transit at this scale requires an exponential energy investment that would bankrupt the remaining infrastructure we need to maintain our homeworld's tenuous stability. The human explained, the simplicity of the economics stunningly effective. We submitted to your quarantine because the fastest, most reliable method of ensuring immediate, high-level reception of vital data is to present ourselves as a manageable problem to the current local authority, rather than an unmanageable threat. You feared us, so you contained us. Had we arrived broadcasting strategic data via long-range, untraceable bursts, you would have prioritized defense over decryption. We chose the path of calculated vulnerability to ensure the data was prioritized. The sheer, cold logic of the human maneuver was breathtaking. They had traded potential military leverage for guaranteed attention, understanding that the existing political structure had to respond to an immediate contained risk, whereas it might ignore a distant, unverified rumor of cosmic peril. The Silith hegemon pulsed a deep, thoughtful sapphire. They are not arrogant. They are pragmatic to the point of self-abnegation. They risk their entire diplomatic corps, their only vessel, on the efficacy of their shared warning. We are not suicidal, Praetor, the human added, seemingly anticipating the thought. Should your security protocols register any change in our vessel's state, any activation of dormant defensive systems, or any attempt to override the quarantine field, the data transfer will cease, and a separate automated beacon will activate. That beacon will transmit the raw, uncalibrated sensory data of the architects, recent gravitational disturbances directly into the open, unencrypted channels of every major power block in the galaxy. It would initiate panic, but it would also force immediate military mobilization against an enemy you are unprepared for. It is not a threat. It is a contingency of absolute transparency, should diplomacy fail. Cathar understood then the depth of the power imbalance. Humanity's strength lay not in massive ships or destructive weapons, but in their capacity for ruthless, ethical computation under duress. They were terrifyingly ethical, prioritizing the survival of the galactic ecosystem, and perhaps their own concept of universal order. Over political expediency or self-preservation in the short term. Envoy Sigma, Cathar commanded, his voice regaining the resonance of true authority. Cease approach. Stand down all non-essential systems. We are transferring processing allocation to the human data stream. Delegate Thrawn, Ambassador Vilos, you will maintain observation and integrate the human analysis into the hegemony's strategic overlay. No action is to be taken regarding the human vessel until the data set is fully integrated and vetted by the primary strategic nexus. The silence returned, but it was no longer a silence of fear. It was the profound quiet of an entire galactic administration holding its breath before a terrifying dawn. For the next 24 cycles, the conclave remained in continuous session, the delegates sustained only by nutrient gels and the terrible compulsion to understand the incoming data. The human vessel, the unyielding will, remained inert in its cage, an unblinking witness to the slow, agonizing dismantling of Xylosian certainty. The data revealed that the architects were not invaders in the traditional sense. They were a form of highly ordered, non-sentient cosmic recycling mechanism. They did not fight. They consumed energy gradients, collapsing organized reality into simpler, less energetic states. Civilizations rich in stable energy matrices, such as those utilizing advanced subspace drives or large-scale stellar containment fields, were simply more efficient targets. The hegemony's own power structure, built upon the efficient channeling of zero-point energy, made them an exquisite delicacy for this force. The revelation regarding the human species' own history was perhaps even more jarring. Their past was replete with self-inflicted genocides, devastating ideological wars fought with kinetic and thermal weapons that reduced continents to molten slag. Yet, the current human mandate had emerged from this crucible with a philosophical bedrock centered on the absolute value of information integrity and systemic survival above all else. They had deliberately purged the concepts of unlimited conquest and resource hoarding, recognizing them as evolutionary dead ends that guaranteed systemic collapse before any external threat materialized. They look at our history of expansion and see only gluttony leading to inevitable poisoning of the local environment, analyzed Thrawn, his voice hushed with a newfound respect. They view our fleet capacity not as strength, but as inefficient energy storage waiting to be plundered. Ambassador Vilos, having spent cycles grappling with the Carillion doctrine of inherent superiority, now seemed humbled. Their core ethical framework it is predicated on the successful navigation of self-destruction. They have mastered restraint not through peace, but through the memory of absolute annihilation. They are, in essence, the galactic immune system, forged by surviving their own fever. Cathar addressed the human projection again, his voice imbued with the gravitas of a millennia-old empire finally acknowledging a superior, albeit unwelcome, wisdom. Human representative, your data confirms the severity of the threat. We accept the reality of the architects. Now you must provide the solution you alluded to. How does one fight a force that weaponizes the laws of physics against structured complexity? The projection remained steady. We do not fight them in the conventional sense, Praetor. To engage them with energy weapons is merely to present them with a denser meal. We learned that the architects possess a predictable vulnerability rooted in their method of assimilation. They require a highly ordered energy gradient to begin the conversion process. They are slowed, stalled, and confused by the introduction of randomized, non-cohesive informational flux. He paused, allowing the profound implication to sink in. We learned this by observing the fate of the precursors, the ones who built the great structural remnants in the Kepler deeps. They attempted to overload the architects with massive, organized energy pulses. It failed spectacularly. We found that systems bombarded with overwhelming, statistically unpredictable, but ultimately low-energy noise, a wave of conceptual static, experienced temporary systemic disruption within the architect's assimilation field. Randomized flux? Cathar queried, leaning closer to the monitor, every segment of his being focused. We utilize precise modulation for all communications. Randomization introduces noise, corruption, and error into all established systems. It is the antithesis of hegemonic order. Precisely, the human confirmed. Order is their sustenance. Disorder is their poison. We require access to your entire sector network, every sensor, every communication relay, every passive monitoring array. We intend to use the entire spatial framework of your hegemony as a vast, synchronized, low-power, conceptual noise generator. We W. You'll not fight them with beams. We will confuse them with a billion simultaneous, contradictory signals that offer no useful energetic structure to consume. This was the large-scale reveal. Humanity was not offering a superweapon. They were offering a philosophical sabotage technique executed on a staggering scale. It required the absolute, total integration of every Xylosian defense and communication network under their temporary direction. The coordination required, Thrawn murmured, running complex overlay simulations, is beyond any joint operation ever conceived. It requires absolute trust in the signal generation methodology. Trust must be earned, delegate, the human responded. And we propose the terms of that trust now. We require your cooperation, not your subjugation. In return for providing the methodology and the algorithmic seeding for the noise generation protocol, the Terran mandate requires only one thing: immediate, unmonitored access to the entirety of the archived data pertaining to the R7 anomalies that you dismissed. We believe those anomalies are not natural phenomena, but residual decay signatures from a precursor conflict with the architects, a conflict fought in a manner similar to our proposed solution. Cathar looked at his counsel, then back at the simple, earnest face of the projected human. They were being asked to surrender control of their core infrastructure to an unknown entity based solely on the promise of survival against a threat they hadn't even comprehended until moments ago. The alternative was certain: quiet assimilation into cosmic nothingness. Ambassador Vilos, Delegate Thrawn, Silith Hegemon, Cathar decreed, his voice ringing with sudden, decisive clarity. The terms are accepted. We will grant full administrative interface access to the Terran mandate for the duration of this immediate crisis response. We will deploy our surveillance assets as directed. We trade our isolation for survival. The Carillion ambassador, abandoning his prior disdain, extended a sensory tendril toward the central interface, an act of profound political capitulation. We accede to the tactical necessity. May your noise disrupt their structure, human. Within hours, the Grand Conclave chamber transformed. Where once tactical projections displayed fleet movements and resource yields, now complex schematics detailing wave propagation and algorithmic chaos theory dominated the view. The single human ship, still held in quarantine, became the nexus of the entire hegemony's analytical power. Two figures, an older human male identified as Commander Elias Vance, the pilot of the Unyielding Will, and a younger, more kinetic female designated Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief algorithmist, were remotely interfaced into the Xylosian nexus, their input direct, precise, and utterly unhurried. The communication was relentless, devoid of bureaucratic delay. Hegemony nexus synchronization, 85%, Dr. Thorne's voice, relayed through the command center, reported with clipped efficiency. Commander Vance, initiate preliminary noise injection sequence on the outermost perimeter sensors. Test for degradation profile. Initiated, Doctor, Vance confirmed. Minimal energy expenditure, introducing uncorrelated prime number permutations across the gravimetric sensors. On the main screen, the area designated R7, where the faint, creeping distortions were noted, flickered. For a moment, the distortions seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by an invisible pebble, before settling back into their subtle, accelerating pattern. Degradation profile 0.003% observed at point of injection, Dr. Thorne noted calmly. Insufficient. We need system-wide saturation. Praetor Cathar, we require immediate integration of the Carillion Network's deep space telemetry array. Their phased array modulation techniques offer the necessary bandwidth variance for true conceptual dissonance. Cathar nodded, the decision having already been made. The integration was performed. The Xylosian architecture, designed for rigid hierarchy, strained under the imposition of the alien, flexible logic. The hegemony was becoming a massive, uncoordinated broadcast antenna, tuned by the minds of two seemingly vulnerable individuals aboard a tiny vessel. The architects will arrive within the predicted window, Vance stated, his voice cutting through the data chatter. We have 30 cycles to achieve maximum saturation density. If we drop below 98% coordinated output for more than 5 consecutive seconds, the assimilation process will accelerate exponentially within the affected zones. The tension was immense, a physical pressure that threatened to buckle the structural integrity of the ancient chamber. They were placing the fate of their entire civilization, their politics, their culture, their very existence, into the hands of beings who had arrived under the guise of being contained prisoners, and whose primary weapon was not firepower, T carefully managed chaos. The Xylosian Empire, for the first time in its history, was operating with a singular, unified purpose dictated by an external, previously unknown entity. The contrast was stark. The Xylosians, masters of rigid stability, now relied on the very unpredictability born from humanity's own chaotic past to survive. Cycles blurred into one another. The operational tempo dictated by Vance and Thorne was relentless. They treated the hegemony's vast computational resources as merely scaffolding for their own conceptual architecture. They mapped the flow of energy through the entire empire, looking not for points of weakness, but for points of cohesion, the very things the architects fed upon. Finally, the long-range sensors registered the undeniable. A vast, terrifying wave was approaching the edge of their charted territory. It was not a fleet, nor a singular object, but a spreading distortion, a silent, inexorable erasure of the space through which it traveled. "They are here," Vance's voice echoed through the conclave, utterly steady. "Thorne initiation sequence. Maximum entropy dispersal across all designated nodes. We generate the noise." Dr. Thorne's reply was a single, focused command. "Injecting core algorithm, the echo of failure, execute." Across the entirety of the Xylosian hegemony, every sensor, every long-range scanner, every communication relay, every power conduit that was momentarily subjugated to the human interface, began to scream, not with detectable energy, but with complex, layered, mathematically contradictory signals. It was a conceptual scream against the silence of cosmic order. On the main projection, the approaching gravitational wave encountered the leading edge of the human-directed interference. The result was not a battle, but a profound physical stutter. Where the wave should have smoothly consumed the local spacetime fabric, it hesitated. The leading edge seemed to ripple, not with external force, but with internal confusion. Energy gradients that should have been smooth pathways for assimilation suddenly became convoluted knots of unusable information. The architects, which processed the universe as a solvable equation, were presented with an unsolvable, deliberately corrupted input. The Silith hegemon displayed a light pattern that translated roughly as awe mingled with profound relief. It is working. The distortion field is failing to stabilize its leading edge. It is recoiling from the illogical input. The human technique was not destruction. It was conceptual indigestion. The architects were forced to process infinite, useless data before they could consume useful energy. The confrontation lasted only the span of a single, breathless Xylosian day. The massive wave of distortion, having encountered the dense fog of randomized conceptual noise generated by the hegemony under human direction, did not retreat. It seemed to fracture, its cohesive structure dissolving into manageable, localized background radiation. The very kind of background radiation the hegemony had always assumed characterized safe space. The threat was not eliminated, but it was pushed back, neutralized by the sheer, disciplined creativity of the very species they had feared and underestimated. When the final stabilization report came through, indicating that the R7 corridors were once again within acceptable statistical variance, Commander Vance allowed a measured sigh to be heard over the comms. "The architects are diverted, Pretor. The immediate threat is mitigated. We suggest maintaining the low-level entropy dispersal for at least 3 standard months to ensure they recalculate their approach vectors away from this sector entirely." Cathar stood slowly, his indigo carapace seeming less burdened now. He ordered the quarantine field around the unyielding will dropped immediately, allowing the vessel to drift freely in the staging bay, no longer a captive, but an honored, if alarming, guest. "Human Commander Vance, Dr. Thorne," Cathar addressed them, his tone now stripped of all suspicion, replaced by an almost desperate gratitude. "You have saved the hegemony from oblivion. You have demonstrated a profound capacity for strategic thought and ethical responsibility that dwarfs our own millennia of cautious stagnation. We owe you an unpayable debt." Vance's projection returned, this time showing the subtle tension easing in his features, replaced by a familiar, weary determination. "We require only the access we requested, Pretor. The data on the R7 anomalies. We need to understand what they were before they became the architect's calling card." The data was released immediately. It was a vast archive, detailing localized space-time tiers that had occurred 1,000 years prior, simultaneous with the Great Silence, but localized near the territory of the long-vanished precursor empire. As the human analysts began parsing the precursor data, they worked with a speed and focus that left the Xylosians breathless. Then, Dr. Thorne's voice, now sharper, edged with alarm, cut through the relative calm. "Commander Vance, look at this. The precursor energy signatures when they experienced those initial temporal tears, they aren't random. They match the algorithmic structure we used after we developed the noise generator concept." Vance's image sharpened. "That's impossible, Doctor. We developed the concept in isolation based on observed energy residue profiles." "But the precursors experienced it first, Commander. Not as a defense, but as an effect. Look at the energy readout frequency within the temporal scar tissue. It's identical to our target output for the architects. Praetor Cathar, we need context on the precursors' final known actions." Cathar accessed the limited hegemony files on the vanished civilization, records sparse and heavily redacted due to political instability following their collapse. The precursors were known for their unified, ambitious goal: to utilize localized space-time distortion to transfer their entire civilization to a higher dimensional state, seeking escape from entropic decay. A chilling silence descended. The human projection seemed to freeze, the image holding a profound, terrible realization. "They weren't trying to escape entropy," Vance whispered, the sound carrying across the vast chamber. "They were attempting to create the noise themselves. They weren't trying to ascend, they were trying to reject the physical universe by overwhelming its rules." Dr. Thorne's voice trembled slightly as she connected the final dots using the newly released precursor data. "Commander, the architects are not arriving to consume this sector. They are reacting to a massive, sustained, century-long signal that has just been activated. Look at the timing correlation. The R7 anomalies. The residue we thought was decay. They are the residual energy footprint of the precursor civilization successfully initiating their dimensional transfer pulse 1,000 years ago." Cathar felt his ancient consciousness reel. If the precursors succeeded in transferring, why did they leave behind such devastating dimensional scars? And why are the architects only now reacting? Vance leaned forward, pointing at a complex chart generated by the integrated systems. "Because the architects are not a natural constant, Praetor. They are not entropy itself. They are the response mechanism to a system attempting to violate fundamental physical law. The precursors' attempt to jump to a higher dimension created a massive, structured energy gradient, the ultimate beacon. The architects followed that beacon to the precursor civilization and consumed them, integrating their methodology as they did so. The implications were devastating. Humanity's desperate gamble, the low-power noise generation designed to repel the architects, had been the exact opposite of the precursors' fatal mistake: the creation of a massive, organized energy beacon. "We have been operating under a false premise," Thorne stated, her voice strained. "We thought the architects were attracted to organized energy. We deployed an organized countersignal, a vast, synchronized network broadcast. Even though it was noise, it was coordinated intent on a galactic scale. We have just made ourselves the most attractive meal in the sector." The main display, which had shown the stabilizing R7 corridors, suddenly flickered, displaying new, violent distortions propagating outward from the very center of the Xylosian domain, from the main processing nexus that had just achieved perfect synchronization under human command. "The noise dispersal protocol we initiated was too perfect," Vance concluded grimly. "It coalesced into a structure the architects recognized, the signature of a civilization capable of massive, sustained information processing. We have just broadcast our location and our energy availability with blinding clarity." Cathar felt a surge of the old, familiar dread, but this time it was tempered by the recent, humbling education in human pragmatism. He looked at the two small, fragile figures guiding the fate of his empire from their confined ship. "Human Commander Vance," Cathar transmitted, his voice firm despite the impending cosmic disaster. "You have revealed the true nature of the architects, and you have revealed our fatal error in response. What is the countermeasure to a signal that is too perfect? How do we shatter the signal that we ourselves created?" Vance looked toward Dr. Thorne, and for the first time, a hint of something akin to human desperation, not fear but acute problem-solving pressure, crossed his projected image. "We have to introduce a fatal flaw into the signal," Thorne said rapidly, tapping commands. A genuine, unrecoverable act of systemic self-sabotage, something so contradictory to the governing logic of the architects that they cannot compute the source. We cannot introduce random noise. Anymore, the system is too coherent, Vance said, his eyes fixed on the expanding distortion wave. We must introduce failure of purpose. Cathar understood. If order was their meal and controlled disorder was their poison, then absolute, unexpected, intentional self-destruction, unrelated to external force, must be the conceptual antidote. What level of systemic destruction is required? Cathar demanded. Vance locked eyes with the Praetor. The level that reflects the origin of our own species, survival, Praetor. We must demonstrate that we are not worth the effort of consumption because we are fundamentally unwilling to sustain the structure you are currently generating for them. We must burn the bridge, Thorne finished. We must render the massive, integrated Zalosian network, the beacon we just constructed, into useless, uncoordinated debris. We must prove absolutely that the structure they are approaching is already a ruin. The final, most harrowing decision was placed upon the Zalosian Praetor. He had to sanction the immediate, intentional collapse of the most advanced integrated infrastructure his civilization had ever built, the infrastructure that represented the pinnacle of their orderly existence, simply to prove to a cosmic predator that the meal was poisoned by its own cook. Silith Hegemon, Carillion Ascendancy, Delegate Thrawn, Carillion stated, his voice calm, detached, the voice of one making a necessary sacrifice. Execute the human termination command on the central processing nexus. Immediately. The Council, having just witnessed the humans save them by understanding chaos, now had to impose chaos upon themselves based on human instruction. The political upheaval was unimaginable, but the alternative was non-existence. The order was given. Across the hegemony, the lights on myriad control centers dimmed as the intricate, delicate synchronization algorithms, the very algorithms that had formed the powerful beacon, were violently corrupted by the human-inserted command. The vast, integrated network dissolved into static, a cascade of uncontrolled feedback loops and intentional hardware overloads. The colossal energy investment made over the last 24 cycles evaporated into incoherent heat and useless, fragmented data. On the main screen, the approaching wave of distortion stalled dramatically. It did not retreat. Instead, the energy signature feeding it suddenly dropped to near zero. The immense, terrifyingly ordered structure faltered, as if a massive engine had suddenly been starved of fuel and then immediately flooded with incompatible coolant. The architects, encountering a perfect structure followed instantly by perfect, inexplicable self-immolation, ceased interaction. The threat receded, not defeated by force, but by the conceptual realization that the energy source was inherently self-terminating. The conclave chamber fell into a profound, echoing silence. The holographic projection of Commander Vance flickered slightly, the image showing a definite weariness. The signal is broken, Praetor, Vance confirmed. The architects have disengaged. They will not return to this sector for a significant period. They have recorded the event as a catastrophic system failure, not a viable energy source. Cathar felt an exhaustion that spanned epochs. He looked at the small vessel, the unyielding will, now drifting peacefully in the bay, its mission complete, its crew exhausted but whole. Humanity, Cathar stated, the word carrying a reverence never before associated with any species outside the ancient Zalosian pantheon. You arrived as an unknown threat, yet you have proven to be the only power capable of understanding and mitigating this ultimate danger. You are not prisoners. You are guides. Vance nodded slowly. We are survivors, Praetor, and survival, we have learned, is rooted in shared risk and the rejection of false certainty. We did not come here to conquer or to preach. We came because we recognize the fundamental architecture of galactic survival. It requires cooperation against the unknown, even if that cooperation means temporarily sacrificing the comfortable illusions of local order. Dr. Thorne added, her voice gaining strength, We thank you for your trust, Praetor. It was a calculated risk on our part, one based on the understanding that any civilization capable of generating such complex political structures must also possess the capacity for profound ethical reevaluation when faced with absolute finality. The immediate crisis was over. The hegemony, reeling from the self-inflicted informational wound, would require centuries to reintegrate its networks, but it would survive. Cathar knew this moment defined his entire epic. He looked at the human vessel, realizing that their single ship held more profound strategic wisdom than all the accumulated military and political doctrines of his empire. "We have so much to learn from you," Cathar conceded. We offer the Terran Mandate full sanctuary, access to our knowledge, and an alliance based on absolute parity. What is your next course? Vance turned slightly within his containment field, his gaze seemingly directed far beyond the boundaries of the Xylossian Empire, towards the galactic void where the architects had retreated. "Our course, Praetor, is defined by the data you provided us regarding the precursor event. We confirmed that the precursors attempted to transcend the physical plane to escape decay. We confirmed that this action attracted the architects." He paused, and the air in the conclave grew thick with anticipation for the final twist, the reason why humanity, having just saved one empire, was already looking toward the next horizon. But we also noticed something in the residual energy bleed of that century-old event. A faint, highly organized, tertiary signal embedded within the temporal scar tissue that the architects were too busy consuming to filter out. Dr. Thorne keyed the final display, projecting a ghostly, complex waveform derived from the precursor archive. It was buried beneath layers of chaos and energy decay, almost invisible. Praetor, the precursors weren't just trying to escape entropy. They were responding to something else entirely. That tertiary signal, it's a complex, artificial transmission, ancient beyond our reckoning, originating from far beyond the Perseus arm. It has been broadcasting continuously since before the precursors even initiated their disastrous dimensional jump. Vance concluded, his face etched with the weight of newly acquired, terrifying context. The architects are not the ultimate threat, Praetor. They are the gatekeepers. They are the cosmic cleanup crew reacting to violations of physics. But the signal that attracted the precursors in the first place, the signal that originated the entire chain of events 1,000 years ago, that signal is still active. It is vast, complex, and originates from a source that dwarfs even the architect's scale of influence. The holographic image of the human representative faded, not by command, but because Vance had physically disconnected the external projection unit, signaling the end of the immediate crisis interaction. The unyielding will remain silent in the bay, having delivered its message, its gift, and its warning. Cathar stood before the silent, terrifying display of the distant, continuous signal. He looked out over the representatives of his empire, the Carillion, the Silith, the Signian, all united now, not by common defense against a recognized rival, but by a shared, overwhelming dread of the unknown. Humanity had not sought to dominate them with superior technology, but to save them with superior philosophy, and in doing so, had revealed that the true enemies were not the monsters they could see, but the ancient, unseen forces that govern the very boundaries of reality. Forces that the humans now seemed destined to face, having already paid the price of initiating first contact with the universe's janitors. The hegemony, once the apex of stability, now understood that survival required embracing the beautiful, terrifying chaos that humanity wielded so naturally. They were no longer alone in the dark. They were merely the newest recruits in a conflict that spanned time and dimensional planes, a conflict initiated by a signal older than their own civilization.